My son-in-law said I was just another burden in the house. The next day, I bought the property and turned the rent into a burden for him. Subscribe to see more stories like this and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. You're just another burden in this house, Martha. A burden we've been carrying for far too long. My hands trembled around my teacup as Richard's words sliced through the elegant dining room. My son-in-law continued eating his roast beef as if he hadn't just shattered what little remained of my self-respect. Across the table, my daughter Cynthia stared at her plate, shoulders hunched forward in that perpetually apologetic posture she'd developed since marrying him. 3 months ago, I was Professor Martha Wilson, respected economics faculty emeritus with a comfortable Boston apartment and a retirement fund that would have made my late husband Robert proud. Now I was relegated to the renovated basement of my daughter's Connecticut home, paying $800 monthly contribution for the privilege of being treated like an unwelcome guest. "I'm sorry if my presence is inconvenient," I said, placing my teacup on the saucer with deliberate care, hiding the tremor in my voice. At 73, I'd grown skilled at masking vulnerability. Richard looked up, that calculating smile spreading across his face. "It's not about convenience, Martha. It's about reality, the financial burden of supporting an additional household member." "I pay my contribution every month," I interrupted, something I rarely dared. His eyes narrowed, "And we appreciate that. But the emotional labor of caring for an elderly parent..." "Richard," Cynthia's voice was barely above a whisper. "Mom's fine on her own. She doesn't need caring for." The flash of irritation that crossed his face disappeared so quickly I might have imagined it. "Of course, darling. I simply meant the additional responsibilities." I excused myself before dessert, retreating to my basement sanctuary. On my meticulously organized desk sat my diary, not filled with sentimental musings, but rather a detailed record of the past 12 weeks. Every dismissive comment, every forgotten dinner invitation, every misplaced piece of my mail. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold, my former university colleague, and now my attorney. "Documents arrived. Meeting tomorrow at 11. Don't sign anything." I allowed myself a small smile as I recalled the conversation I'd overheard 3 nights ago between Richard and Cynthia. "You need to talk to your mother about that loan," he'd hissed. "We need that money before the bank forecloses." What Richard didn't know, what neither of them knew, was that I'd spent the last month investigating his financial dealings. The successful real estate investor was drowning in debt, his business teetering on collapse. He needed my $920,000 from selling my Boston apartment, money I'd quietly moved into a series of secured accounts on Harold's advice. I picked up the framed photo of Robert and me at our 40th anniversary. "You always said I was too trusting," I whispered to his smiling face. "But you also taught me that when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. Tomorrow would change everything." The property records Harold had uncovered revealed that Richard didn't even own this house. He rented it from a property management company now eager to liquidate assets. I touched the handle of my purse, feeling the outline of the document inside. Not just any document, the deed to this very house, purchased secretly through Harold's connections at Oak Ridge Properties. The burden was about to shift. The first sign something was wrong should have been the basement bedroom. "It's more private," Cynthia had explained, not meeting my eyes. I'd accepted it gratefully, not wanting to be a burden after selling my apartment. That word again, burden. I woke early, watching sunlight filter through the small basement windows. Upstairs, floorboards creaked as Richard and Cynthia started their day. I dressed carefully in my navy pantsuit, the one Robert always said made me look distinguished, and added my pearl earrings. "Battle armor." "You're dressed up," Cynthia commented when I emerged upstairs. Something in her voice sounded almost alarmed. "Meeting an old colleague for coffee," I replied casually. "Harold Freeman, you remember him? From the economics department?" Richard appeared in the doorway, scrolling through his phone. "Harold Freeman? The attorney?" I kept my expression neutral. "He's dabbled in law, yes. Mostly teaches financial ethics these days." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly. "Interesting choice for a coffee date. We're old friends." I kissed Cynthia's cheek. "Don't wait lunch for me." Harold was already waiting at the caf, his silver hair unmistakable even from the parking lot. He stood to embrace me, his familiar cologne bringing unexpected tears to my eyes. "You look well, Martha," he said, though his expression told me he thought anything but. "Liar," I laughed, settling into the chair opposite him. "How bad is it?" Harold slid a folder across the table. "Your son-in-law has quite the history. 3 businesses dissolved under suspicious circumstances, 2 pending lawsuits from former clients alleging misappropriation of funds, and a credit score that would make an undergraduate blush." My stomach tightened. "And Cynthia? Her name on any of it?" "He's kept her remarkably isolated from his financial dealings." "But," Harold hesitated, "tell me." "He's systematically transferred most of their joint assets into accounts solely under his name over the past 2 years. I thought of my brilliant daughter, Harvard Business School graduate, reduced to asking permission to buy groceries. The woman who'd once delivered presentations to boardrooms now jumped when her phone chimed with Richard's texts. "There's more," Harold continued. "The house isn't his. It's a rental property owned by Oak Ridge Properties. They're liquidating assets before a corporate merger." "Oak Ridge?" I set my coffee down. "Eleanor Thompson still works there, doesn't she?" Harold smiled. "Chief Financial Officer now. You taught her, didn't you? Advanced Economic Theory, 1998. I felt the first flutter of possibility. She always had a brilliant mind for strategic planning. "Martha, what are you thinking?" I looked out the window, watching a young mother push a stroller past the calf. "Tell me, Harold, how much would it cost to purchase that house?" Harold's eyebrows shot up. "Approximately $650,000 given the market and condition. But Martha, that process would take months." "Not necessarily," I interrupted, something I'd been doing more lately. "Not if Eleanor is willing to expedite things for an old professor who still has recommendations to write." Harold studied me for a long moment. "This isn't just about securing housing, is it?" I thought about Cynthia's hunched shoulders, her dimming light. I thought about the $800 monthly contribution that disappeared into Richard's accounts. I thought about being called a burden in my own family. "No," I said finally. "It's about justice." "Mom, do you need anything from the store?" Cynthia asked, hovering in my doorway. 3 weeks had passed since my meeting with Harold, and each day brought new revelations about Richard's deceptions. "I'm fine, darling," I replied, closing my notebook where I'd been documenting another example of Richard's financial manipulation, accidentally charging my credit card for household expenses instead of his own. Cynthia lingered, twisting her wedding ring. "Richard thinks we should discuss your long-term plans soon. With your apartment sold?" I patted the bed beside me. "Sit with me a moment." She perched on the edge, reminding me of her teenage self, uncertain, searching for approval. My confident daughter had vanished, replaced by this nervous woman constantly checking her phone. "Do you remember your graduation speech at Harvard?" I asked. "You said something about never letting fear make your decisions." Her eyes clouded. "That was before my breakdown." "What exactly happened with that?" I kept my voice casual, though my heart raced. Harold's investigation had found no medical records of any psychological treatment. I made a terrible mistake during a client presentation." Her voice dropped. "Richard says I couldn't handle the pressure. He took care of everything afterward." "Took care of everything how?" I pressed gently. "Explained to my firm why I needed to resign. Managed our finances so I could focus on recovery." She glanced at her watch. "I should go. Richard needs these groceries for dinner." After she left, I called the number Harold had given me. "Special Agent Grayson?" "Martha Wilson. I believe we have a mutual acquaintance in Harold Freeman." The next day, I met Michael Grayson at a park 3 miles from Cynthia's house. Despite being in his 40s, he still had the earnest expression of the graduate student who'd once debated ethical finance theories in my classroom. "Professor Wilson," he greeted me. "I wish we were reconnecting under better circumstances. How much has Harold told you?" "Enough to concern me professionally." He sat beside me on the bench. "Richard Whitfield has been on our radar for alleged investor fraud, but we've lacked sufficient evidence for a warrant. And if someone were living in his house, someone with access to his documents?" Grayson's expression remained neutral. "We would never encourage civilian investigation. Professor, that could be dangerous and potentially compromise evidence." "Hypothetically speaking," I pressed. He sighed. "Hypothetically, documentation of suspicious financial activity observed in plain sight could be relevant to an ongoing investigation. And if this hypothetical person discovered evidence that Mr. Whitfield had fabricated a story about his wife's mental breakdown to control her finances?" Something flashed in Grayson's eyes. "That would potentially constitute financial abuse, which often accompanies other forms of control." On my walk home, I formulated a plan. The pieces were falling into place. Harold had confirmed my offer on the house was being expedited by Eleanor, and Grayson's carefully worded responses told me the FBI was already building a case against Richard. I just needed time and evidence, and to keep Richard believing I was just a burden too fearful of homelessness to challenge him. "Considering your age, Martha, have you thought about assisted living?" Richard asked over dinner, his tone dripping with false concern. Many communities offer excellent care for seniors with limited independence. I dabbed my lips with my napkin, swallowing both my food and my retort. "I'm quite capable of living independently, Richard." Of course, he waved dismissively. "But accidents happen. Falls are the leading cause of injury among seniors." Cynthia shifted uncomfortably. "Mom seems fine, Richard. For now." He reached across to pat my hand condescendingly. "But planning ahead is prudent, especially given the financial considerations." "What financial considerations?" I asked innocently. Richard's smile tightened. "Senior care is expensive. Your savings from the apartment sale won't last forever, especially with current inflation rates. I've been meaning to discuss some investment opportunities that could protect your nest egg." There it was, the first direct attempt to access my money. Harold had warned me this was coming. "I'd be happy to hear your thoughts," I replied, watching his eyes light up with anticipated victory. "Excellent. I have some projections I can show you after dinner." 2 hours later, Richard spread financial documents across the dining table. Impressive-looking charts showed remarkable returns from his exclusive investment opportunity. 15% guaranteed annual return, he emphasized, tapping the paper. "My clients pay premium fees for access to this fund." I examined the prospectus, recognizing classic red flags, promises of guaranteed returns, vague descriptions of investment strategies, pressure to act quickly. "It sounds promising," I said carefully, "though I've always been conservative with investments. My late husband preferred index funds." Richard's patronizing smile returned. "With all due respect to Robert, Martha, the market has changed dramatically. These opportunities require significant capital and quick decision-making. I can only hold your spot in this investment for another week." "I'll need to think about it," I replied. "Perhaps review it with my accountant." His smile faltered. "Your accountant? These are proprietary strategies, Martha. Discussing them outside our family could jeopardize the opportunity." "I understand." I gathered my reading glasses. "Still, I never make financial decisions without sleeping on them. Robert taught me that." Later that night, I documented our conversation in my notebook before calling Harold from the privacy of my bathroom with the shower running. "He's making his move," I whispered. "Eleanor finalized the paperwork today," Harold replied. "The property is yours, Martha. The deed transfer will be recorded tomorrow." "And the timing with Agent Grayson's investigation? He's requested 2 more weeks before we reveal anything. They're gathering critical evidence." I ended the call and sat on the edge of the bathtub, my heart racing. After decades of teaching financial ethics, I was watching a textbook fraud attempt unfold in my own family. The professor in me was fascinated. The mother in me was devastated. The next morning, Richard cornered me in the kitchen. "Have you considered my proposal, Martha?" "I have." I poured my tea calmly. "I'll need those documents to review again. Perhaps this evening?" His shoulders relaxed. "Excellent. I knew you were too smart to pass this up." "Oh, I'm certainly not passing up this opportunity," I replied, smiling into my teacup. "The deed is officially recorded," Harold confirmed over the phone. Congratulations, Martha. You're now the legal owner of 47 Oak Ridge Lane." I closed my eyes, allowing myself a moment of satisfaction. "How long until we can inform the current residents?" "Legally, you could serve notice immediately. But given Agent Grayson's timeline, 2 more weeks," I finished. "I know." Those 2 weeks proved excruciating. Richard grew increasingly attentive, preparing my favorite meals and inquiring after my comfort. His transparent manipulation might have been amusing if it weren't so predatory. "I've been thinking about your investment opportunity," I told him over breakfast. "Perhaps we should discuss the details again tonight?" His eyes gleamed with anticipated victory. "I'll prepare everything. This is the right decision, Martha." That afternoon, I met Agent Grayson at our usual park bench. The spring air carried the scent of freshly cut grass, reminding me of Robert's obsession with our lawn in Boston. "We've made significant progress," Grayson said, feeding breadcrumbs to gathering pigeons a cover for our meeting. "Veronica Hayes is cooperating." "Veronica?" The name was unfamiliar. Mr. Whitfield's assistant. Grayson's expression remained professional, but I caught something in his tone. And his romantic partner for the past 14 months. My stomach twisted. An affair. Yes, and she's provided access to emails discussing their plans to extract your assets before relocating to Mexico. The betrayal stung, not for myself, but for Cynthia. Does she know about my daughter's supposed breakdown? Grayson nodded grimly. Ms. Hayes confirmed there was never any breakdown. Mr. Whitfield sabotaged your daughter's presentation by altering her files the night before. He then convinced her the resulting mistakes were symptoms of mental instability. My hands clenched around the bench. He gaslighted my daughter into believing she was mentally ill? It's a documented pattern of financial and psychological abuse. Grayson's voice softened. Professor, I understand your desire for immediate action, but rushing could compromise the case against him. And my daughter's safety? He's actively trying to access my money. Stall him. We're almost ready to move. I returned home to find Cynthia in the garden, digging with unusual vigor in her flower beds. Everything all right? I asked, noting her reddened eyes. Fine. She stabbed the soil. Richard says the financial advisor called. You've been meeting with lawyers? My heart stuttered. Harold Freeman is an old friend. Richard says he's putting together legal documents for you. Are you planning to move out? Her voice cracked. I know things haven't been perfect, but I thought. I knelt beside her despite my protesting knees. Cynthia, I'm not going anywhere without you. Without me? Confusion crossed her face. I'd said too much. Grayson had warned against premature revelations. I just mean I wouldn't make major decisions without discussing them with you first. She nodded. But something had shifted in her expression. A seed of doubt had been planted. That night, Richard cornered me in the kitchen. My associate says you've been inquiring about the property deed for this house. I maintained my composure. Simply curiosity about your investment portfolio. You've been so successful. I wanted to understand your strategies better. His eyes narrowed, but he accepted the flattery. The property market is complex, best left to professionals. Indeed, I replied, thinking of the deed sitting in my safe deposit box. Best left to professionals. I'll need your banking information today. Martha, Richard announced at breakfast, sliding a form across the table. For the investment opportunity we discussed. I stirred my tea calmly. Today? The window is closing. My other clients are eager to increase their positions. He checked his watch. I have a meeting downtown, but we can complete the paperwork when I return. After he left, Cynthia hovered in the doorway. Mom, are you sure about this investment? It's a lot of money. I studied my daughter's face, the worry lines that hadn't been there a year ago, the way she kept glancing toward the driveway as if expecting Richard to return suddenly. Cynthia, do you remember Professor Thompson? Eleanor? From my department? The tall woman with the amazing scarves? Of course. She came to Dad's funeral. She's having lunch with me today. Would you like to join us? Something like panic flashed across her face. I can't. Richard needs me to organize his client files this afternoon. On a Saturday? He's behind on paperwork. She twisted her wedding ring. He gets anxious when things aren't properly filed. I watched my Harvard-educated daughter, who had once managed billion-dollar portfolios, reduced to filing papers for a fraudulent husband. The transformation broke my heart. Another time then, I said gently. At noon, I met Eleanor at an upscale restaurant downtown. At 68, she remained striking silver hair in a precise bob, impeccably dressed in a designer suit. Martha, you look wonderful, she lied kindly, embracing me. Liar, I replied with a smile. But thank you for the fiction. Over lunch, Eleanor handed me an envelope. It's all finalized. As the new owner, you can maintain the current rental agreement or issue a new one with adjusted terms. And if I choose to adjust the terms significantly? Eleanor's eyes sparkled with understanding. As long as you provide proper notice under Connecticut law, the terms are entirely at your discretion. Back home, back. I carefully placed the envelope in my desk drawer just as Richard's car pulled into the driveway. I heard his footsteps overhead, followed by his voice calling for Cynthia. I checked my watch. Agent Grayson had requested one more week, but Richard was accelerating his timeline. I needed to adapt. That evening, Richard prepared an elaborate dinner, my favorite salmon with dill, fresh asparagus, even a bottle of expensive Chardonnay. A celebration, he declared, filling my glass. To new beginnings and smart investments. I raised my glass. To ownership. Exactly. he agreed, missing my meaning entirely. Now after dinner, we can review those forms. Actually, I interrupted, I've been thinking about your investment proposal, Richard. His smile faltered slightly. Having doubts? I assure you, not doubts. Questions. I set down my wine glass. For instance, why does your prospectus list a business address that's actually a UPS store? Or why your fund's supposed custodian bank doesn't exist? Color drained from his face. Those are simply administrative, and I'm curious about Veronica, I continued. Is she handling the administrative details too, along with your travel arrangements to Mexico? Richard's fork clattered against his plate. Cynthia looked between us, confusion etched on her face. Mom, what are you talking about? I reached for my purse, retrieving the envelope Eleanor had given me. I think it's time we discussed the actual ownership of this house, don't you, Richard? The silence that followed was absolute. Richard stared at the property deed I'd placed on the table, his complexion ashen. Cynthia's eyes darted between us, confusion giving way to alarm. Richard's voice rasped. This is some kind of joke. No joke. I kept my tone even. I purchased this house from Oak Ridge Properties 3 weeks ago. The sale was finalized and recorded yesterday. You can't do this. His knuckles whitened around his fork. You can't just buy property? I assure you, I can. And I did. I turned to Cynthia. Darling, there are things about Richard you need to know. This is ridiculous. Richard pushed back from the table, chair legs scraping harshly against hardwood. Cynthia, your mother is clearly confused, possibly early dementia. The FBI doesn't think I'm confused, Richard. I maintained eye contact with my daughter. They've been investigating your husband for months. Financial fraud, client fund misappropriation, wire fraud. Cynthia's hand flew to her mouth. What are you saying? She's delusional, Richard snapped. This is exactly why I suggested assisted living. Richard Whitfield, I continued calmly, has been systematically stealing from his clients. He's also been planning to access my savings from the apartment sale before fleeing to Mexico. With his assistant, Veronica, his romantic partner for over a year. The color drained from Cynthia's face. She turned to Richard, searching for denial in his expression. He recovered quickly. Cynthia, honey, you know how your mother gets. Remember what Dr. Lansing said about her adjustment issues after your father died? There is no Dr. Lansing, I said, just as there was no breakdown on your part. Cynthia, he sabotaged your presentation by altering your files the night before. That's enough. Richard slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes jump. I will not sit here and be accused by a confused old woman in my own house. Not your house, I corrected. My house, and starting next month. Rent will be $3,200, a 30% increase to reflect current market rates. Richard's facade cracked. Rage twisted his features as he lunged across the table, knocking over his wine glass. You scheming bitch! Richard! Cynthia's voice cut through his fury. She stood, backing away from the table. Don't, please. He froze, seeming to remember her presence. The mask slipped back into place. Cynthia, can't you see what's happening? Your mother is trying to divide us. Is it true? She whispered. About Veronica? Something ugly flashed across his face. This is absurd. I'm calling Dr. Maynard. Your mother needs evaluation. Another fictional doctor? I raised an eyebrow. Agent Grayson would be very interested in adding witness intimidation to your charges. The doorbell rang, its cheerful chime incongruous with the tension. Richard's eyes darted toward the entrance. Expecting someone? I asked pleasantly. Agent Grayson stood on the porch, flanked by 2 other agents in FBI jackets. I'd called him from the restaurant bathroom after meeting with Eleanor, explaining that Richard was accelerating his timeline. Mr. Whitfield, Grayson's voice was professionally neutral. We'd like to ask you some questions regarding Whitfield investment strategies. As they led Richard to their vehicle, he turned back toward the house. This isn't over, Martha. You think you've won, but you'll regret this. Cynthia stood beside me in the doorway, trembling. Mom, what's happening? Is it really true? All of it? I put my arm around her shoulders, noticing how thin she'd become. Not all at once. Darling, let's start with one truth at a time. Morning light filtered through the kitchen windows as I prepared coffee. 3 days had passed since Richard's questioning by the FBI, released without charges. Yet, as Agent Grayson emphasized, Richard had retreated to a hotel, returning only to collect clothes and documents under the watchful eyes of agents executing a search warrant. Footsteps on the stairs announced Cynthia, eyes shadowed from another sleepless night. She accepted the coffee mug I offered with trembling hands. I found these in his office. She placed a folder on the counter. Credit card statements, charges at restaurants I've never been to, hotel rooms in New York when he claimed to be at conferences in Chicago. I covered her hand with mine. You don't have to look at all of it right now. 14 months. Her voice broke. He's been with her for 14 months, while I was here, believing I was too mentally fragile to work, to maintain friendships, to handle our finances. It wasn't your fault, I said firmly. Richard systematically isolated and gaslighted you. I'm Harvard Business School. Mom, bitterness edged her words. I managed portfolio risk for Blackstone. How did I not see this? Because abusers are skilled manipulators, and because you trusted your husband. I poured more coffee. The woman I raised is still in there, Cynthia. Brilliant and capable. He didn't erase her, he just buried her for a while. My phone buzzed with a text from Harold. Richard filed countersuit, claims elder manipulation. Hearing scheduled. I showed it to Cynthia, whose spine straightened perceptibly. He's claiming you manipulated him? That's absurd. It's a desperate ploy, I replied. Harold expected this. We're prepared. Later that afternoon, Dr. Rebecca Cohen arrived, a forensic psychologist specializing in coercive control, recommended by Agent Grayson. In my study, she reviewed the documentation I'd meticulously maintained. This is textbook financial abuse, combined with psychological manipulation, she confirmed. The isolation, the fabricated mental health crisis, controlling access to transportation and communication, monitoring movements. Will my daughter recover? I asked, the question that truly mattered. Dr. Cohen's expression softened. Recovery isn't linear, Martha. There will be good days and difficult ones, but with proper support, yes, Cynthia can rebuild her life and sense of self. When Richard arrived that evening to collect more belongings, I handed him an envelope containing formal rental terms. What's this? He demanded. Your new lease agreement, $30,200 monthly, due on the 1st. Security deposit of $6,400 required immediately. He crumpled the paper. You won't get away with this. My attorney will destroy you in court. Your attorney from Stevenson and Palmer? They dropped you as a client this morning. I smiled pleasantly. Something about mounting evidence of financial impropriety. For a moment, his mask slipped completely. Rage contorted his features as he stepped toward me. You think you're so clever, don't you? A washed-up professor playing detective? Step back. Richard. Cynthia's voice came from the doorway. She held her phone up. I'm recording this conversation, and I've already pressed the emergency alert button Agent Grayson provided. Richard froze, gaze darting between us. The calculation was visible on his face, weighing options, assessing risks. Take what you came for and leave, I said. Unless you'd prefer to explain to the agents why you violated the terms of your release by threatening me. He grabbed a suitcase from the hall closet and stormed out, tires squealing as he accelerated away. Cynthia's hand trembled as she lowered her phone. He wasn't going to hurt you. Perhaps not physically, I agreed, but I've had enough of his intimidation tactics. She sat heavily on the stairs. I don't know who I am anymore, Mom. Everything I believed about my life, my marriage, even myself. It was all his construction. I joined her on the step, my knees protesting. Then we'll discover who you are now, day by day. The prosecution is offering a deal, Agent Grayson explained over coffee at our regular park bench. 2 years in federal prison, financial restitution to victims, permanent revocation of his securities licenses. 5 months had passed since Richard's initial questioning. The federal investigation had expanded to include 12 clients who'd lost significant investments in his fraudulent schemes. And the charges related to what he did to Cynthia? I asked. Grayson's expression tightened. Psychological abuse isn't easily prosecuted, Martha. But the financial aspects preventing her from working, misrepresenting her mental health to control shared assets, those strengthen the overall case against him. I watched a young family on the playground, the parents laughing as their toddler attempted the slide. Will Cynthia need to testify? Her testimony would be powerful, especially regarding the financial control. But ultimately, that's her decision. Back home, I found Cynthia in the living room, surrounded by paperwork, resume drafts, financial statements, insurance documents. At 35, she was reclaiming her independence piece by methodical piece. Harvard's Alumni Career Services recommended these financial firms, she said without looking up. All have mentorship programs for professionals returning after extended absences. I set down my purse. That's wonderful. Is it? She finally met my gaze. I'm 35, starting over at entry-level positions after a 7-year gap, competing against recent graduates a decade younger. With your experience and education, and a 7-year employment gap, I can't easily explain. She pushed her hair back. What do I say in interviews? My husband convinced me I was mentally unstable as part of his financial fraud scheme? I sat beside her. You say you took time away from the workforce for personal reasons, and now you're eager to apply your considerable skills and Harvard education to new challenges. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. You make it sound so simple. Not simple, but possible. I pointed to a listing she'd circled. Wellington Management has an excellent returnship program. Your former mentor Gregory Williams is on their board now. How did you know he was my mentor? I pay attention. I didn't mention the hours spent researching opportunities while she slept, the calls to former colleagues with connections in financial services. The doorbell interrupted us. Through the window, I spotted Richard's luxury sedan at the curb. I'll handle this, I said, but Cynthia stood. No, we'll handle it together. Richard looked thinner. The confident swagger diminished. His attorney hovered behind him, not the prestigious firm he'd previously retained, but a younger man with a desperate eagerness. Mrs. Wilson, the attorney began, my client wishes to discuss an arrangement regarding the property and certain misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? Cynthia's voice was ice. Is that what we're calling federal fraud charges now? Richard stepped forward. Cynthia, please, this has gotten out of hand. If your mother hadn't interfered. My mother saved me, she interrupted. From you, from believing I was crazy, from throwing away everything I worked for. You weren't well, he insisted. You needed support. I needed truth, her voice rose. Not manipulation, not lies about my mental health, not an affair while you controlled every aspect of my life. The attorney cleared his throat uncomfortably. Perhaps we could discuss the property matter directly? Mr. Whitfield is prepared to vacate the premises if certain financial considerations. The rent is $3,200 monthly. Due on the 1st, I stated. Security deposit of $6,400, non-negotiable. That's highway robbery, Richard exploded. The previous landlord didn't know you were running fraudulent investment schemes from their property, I replied. I'd say you're getting a bargain. After they left, Cynthia collapsed onto the sofa, emotionally drained but with a new lightness in her expression. I never stood up to him before, she whispered. Not once in 7 years. I squeezed her hand. How did it feel? A slow smile spread across her face. Like waking up? The Commonwealth of Massachusetts versus Richard Whitfield, the bailiff announced. The federal courthouse gleamed with marble and authority as I sat beside Cynthia in the gallery. 9 months had passed since our confrontation in the dining room. 9 months of rebuilding and revelations. Richard sat at the defense table, his posture rigid in his expensive suit. When the judge entered, I noticed how his attorney subtly repositioned him shoulders back, expression contrite, the performance of remorse. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, outlined the charges methodically. Wire fraud, securities fraud, money laundering, client fund misappropriation. The list continued, each charge supported by meticulous documentation provided by the FBI and cooperating witnesses, including Veronica Hayes. When Cynthia was called to testify, she squeezed my hand before approaching the stand. Gone was the hunched posture and hesitant voice. In their place stood the daughter I remembered, spine straight, voice clear, Harvard confidence restored. Mrs. Whitfield, the prosecutor began, could you describe how the defendant controlled your financial affairs? Cynthia's testimony was devastating in its precision. She detailed Richard's systematic campaign to convince her she was mentally unstable, his insistence that she couldn't handle financial decisions, his isolation tactics that separated her from colleagues who might have recognized the manipulation. He told me I'd had a breakdown, she explained, that I'd made catastrophic mistakes during a client presentation, that I couldn't trust my own perceptions or decisions. And was any of that true? The prosecutor asked. No, Cynthia's voice strengthened. The FBI investigation revealed he deliberately sabotaged my presentation by altering my files, then used the resulting confusion to convince me I was unstable. During cross-examination, Richard's attorney attempted to paint Cynthia as complicit, You have an MBA from Harvard Business School. Are you asking this court to believe you didn't review financial statements for 7 years? I'm telling this court that my husband systematically destroyed my self-confidence and convinced me I was mentally ill, she replied evenly. And yes, I believed him. That's how coercive control works. When it was my turn to testify, I recounted discovering Richard's schemes, working with the FBI, and ultimately purchasing the house to protect both my assets and my daughter. Mrs. Wilson, Richard's attorney asked during cross-examination, isn't it true you deliberately set out to humiliate my client by becoming his landlord? I met his gaze steadily. I set out to protect my daughter and my financial security from a man who called me a burden while attempting to steal my retirement savings. The judge's ruling came after 2 days of testimony. Richard would serve 18 months in federal prison, make full restitution to his victims, permanently surrender all financial licenses, and complete psychological counseling for controlling behaviors. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered as Richard was led to a waiting vehicle. He caught my eye briefly, his expression unreadable before the car door closed. Agent Grayson approached us on the courthouse steps. You both showed remarkable courage. Your testimonies were crucial to securing this conviction. Will it be enough? I asked. 18 months seems light for what he did. The financial restitution will be substantial, Grayson assured us, and his career in finance is permanently ended. For someone whose identity was built around projecting success, that may be the harshest punishment. That evening, Cynthia and I sat in the garden behind the house, Richard's former domain, now flourishing under her care. Wellington offered me the position, she announced, Associate Portfolio Manager in their Sustainable Investments Division. I squeezed her hand. I never doubted you. I did. She looked up at the stars emerging in the twilight. I doubted everything about myself for years. And now? A slow smile spread across her face. Now I remember who I am. The moving boxes stacked in the foyer marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. 14 months after purchasing this house, I was selling it not out of necessity, but choice. The final walkthrough is scheduled for tomorrow, Cynthia said, checking her phone. Buyers seem eager to close quickly. I ran my hand along the banister. Any regrets about selling? She considered this, her expression thoughtful. This house served its purpose. It was never really home. After Richard began his prison sentence, we decided to rent the house to a young family while we considered our next steps. The rental income had been steady, and property values in the area had increased significantly. Harold estimated the sale would net approximately $780,000, a healthy profit on my original investment. Martha? Eleanor Thompson's voice called from the doorway. The car service is here for these boxes. I embraced my old friend. Thank you for everything, Eleanor. I couldn't have done this without you. Nonsense, she waved dismissively. You'd have found another way. You always do. As the movers loaded the last of our belongings, Harold arrived with the final paperwork. At 75, he remained sharp as ever, though he'd officially retired from teaching the previous year. All in order, he confirmed, handing me a folder. The Cambridge property closes next week. Your mortgage is approved at the rate we discussed. Cynthia joined us, scrolling through emails on her phone. Wellington wants me to lead the ESG integration team on the new climate initiative. Pride swelled in my chest. 9 months into her new position, she'd already received a promotion and significant recognition for her work. The brilliant, confident daughter I'd always known had fully re-emerged. Mrs. Wilson? A voice called from the driveway. Agent Grayson approached, looking somewhat out of place in casual clothes rather than his usual FBI attire. Just wanted to update you personally, he said. Richard's parole hearing is scheduled for next month. Given his behavior in prison and the restitution payments, there's a strong possibility he'll be released early. Cynthia tensed beside me. Will he come looking for us? His parole conditions would prohibit contact, Grayson assured her. But I thought you should be prepared. After he left, we finished our final walkthrough of the empty house. In the kitchen, Cynthia paused by the window overlooking the garden she'd restored. Are you worried? I asked. About Richard being released? She considered this, head tilted thoughtfully. Not worried exactly. He can't hurt us anymore. We know who he is now. And more importantly, we know who we are. As we locked the door for the final time, a delivery truck pulled into the driveway. The driver approached with an envelope. Delivery for Martha Wilson? Inside was a letter from Richard, postmarked from the Federal Correctional Facility. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. "Martha," it began, "as I approach my parole hearing, I've been required to engage in rehabilitative reflection. My counselor suggests making amends is part of this process. I want you to know I regret how events unfolded between us." The letter continued with carefully constructed phrases that sounded sincere without actually admitting wrongdoing or accepting responsibility. Classic Richard performative remorse, crafted for an audience of parole board members. "What will you do?" Cynthia asked, reading over my shoulder. I folded the letter and placed it in my purse. "Nothing. His amends aren't for me to accept or reject. They're for him to make peace with himself." We walked to our waiting car, leaving behind the house that had been both battlefield and turning point. Ahead lay Cambridge, a duplex near Harvard Square, upper floor for Cynthia, main floor for me, with a small garden already planned. "You know," Cynthia said as we drove away, "for someone he called a burden, you certainly turned the tables." I smiled, watching the house recede in the rearview mirror. "Sometimes the burden becomes the strength." "To Martha Wilson," Harold raised his glass, "who proves it's never too late for a new chapter." Friends and family gathered in our Cambridge garden to celebrate my 75th birthday. 2 years had passed since we left Hartford, 2 years of rebuilding and renewal. Our duplex had become a true home, my main floor filled with treasured books and mementos, Cynthia's upper level reflecting her renewed confidence with its bold colors and modern art. The garden between us flourished with herbs and flowers, a shared project that healed us both. "Speech," someone called, and reluctantly I stood. "At 75, I began. "I'm supposed to be settled, predictable." Instead, the past 2 years taught me that life's most important lessons can come at any age. I learned that sometimes strength looks like starting over, that dignity isn't what others grant you, but what you claim for yourself. My gaze found Cynthia, now executive director of sustainable investments at Wellington, her professional reputation fully restored. She'd started dating again recently, cautiously, with the wisdom of experience and the support of continued therapy. I learned that family isn't about obligation, but choice, I continued, and that the burden someone tries to make you believe you are might actually be the strength they fear. After the guests departed, Cynthia and I sat in the twilight garden, fireflies beginning their evening dance among the lavender. "Richard was released last month," she said quietly. "His attorney contacted mine about finalizing the divorce." I nodded. "We'd expected this. How do you feel about it?" "Indifferent, mostly." She twirled her wine glass thoughtfully. "The woman who loved him doesn't exist anymore. She was his creation. And the woman you are now?" A slow smile spread across her face. "Is entirely my own." My phone chimed with an email notification. Eleanor Thompson, checking if we'd received the investment prospectus for a new sustainable energy fund Oak Ridge was developing. At my suggestion, they'd hired Cynthia as a consultant on the project, recognizing her expertise in ESG investments. "Mom?" Cynthia's voice pulled me back to the present. "I've been thinking about writing a book, about financial coercion and psychological manipulation in relationships." "You'd be excellent at that," I replied. "Your perspective is valuable. I thought maybe we could write it together. Your academic background, my personal experience." She hesitated. "Would you consider it?" Warmth spread through my chest. I'd be honored. Later that night, alone in my room, I opened the drawer containing Richard's letter from prison. Beside it lay another, delivered last week, a formal apology now that he'd been released, part of his ongoing therapy requirements. I removed both letters and carried them to the fireplace. The flames consumed the papers quickly, Richard's carefully crafted words turning to ash. From the bookshelf, I took down the photo of Robert and me on our 40th anniversary. "You were right about so many things," I told his smiling image, "especially about finding strength in unexpected places." Through the ceiling, I heard Cynthia's footsteps, confident, purposeful. My brilliant daughter, reclaiming her power day by day. In helping her find her way back, I'd discovered new dimensions of my own strength. At 73, I'd been called a burden. My dignity stripped away at a dining room table by a man who saw me as nothing but an obstacle and potential victim. At 75, I stood in a home of my choosing, surrounded by a life rebuilt through courage and determination. The burden, it turned out, was never me at all. It was the weight of lies, manipulation, and false limitations that we'd both finally shed. I closed the curtains on the Cambridge evening, at peace with the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding life's hardships, but from transforming them into stepping stones toward an unexpected rebirth. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.